in the headlines yet again. This is kind of frustrating, right? I mean, and you've seen this unfold so many times. I mean, I guess you just kind of shake your head at this point in time. They just can't seem to get it right.
Right. So I think we're doing a lot of positive things with respect to ankle monitoring, but the positives haven't been applied yet to the juvenile justice system. So a week ago Monday, there was a murder of a 15-year-old in the 7th District. That was the first homicide in the 7th District in 55 days. We've been tracking this since 2019. The 7th District has never gone 55 days without a homicide. But, on a week ago Monday, October the 7th, a 15-year-old was murdered at about 8:45, and a few days after his murder, it was revealed that he was wearing an ankle monitor. So the questions, arise: how did this happen? Was he under some type of court order to not be out at that time? And we don't know definitively yet. So I know that your station, a lot of other people in the media, are talking about this, and rightfully so. You and I have been talking about it for years and years. We've gone through some highs and unfortunately a lot of lows. And one of the things that's been discussed recently is the fact that a new law went into effect or was passed during this past session. It goes into effect in January of 2025. And, what is being talked about is that this will create some statewide uniform rules governing mandatory requirements for electronic monitoring service providers and manufacturers. That'll be a good thing. But we're already doing it the right way in New Orleans for adult offenders. We're just not doing it for juvenile offenders. So this law is, I think, a testament to the hard work of the service provider in this city, ASAP, Matt and Jill Dennis, that have started this business, and they have, I believe, set the bar as to how electronic monitoring should be done. But unfortunately, they're only doing electronic monitoring on adult offenders. And what we're seeing is the examples of how electronic monitoring cannot and will not provide the results that people expect what the technology is capable of if it is not properly applied. And we're seeing it not properly applied and utilized in the juvenile arena. And those offenders, in this particular case, we're talking about, a young man, a 15-year-old wearing a monitor. He was a murder victim. We've seen other examples of 15 and 16-year-olds being the perpetrators of crimes while wearing an ankle monitor. So this law that goes into effect next year, which is already essentially the way that Matt Dennis and Jill Dennis are operating their electronic monitoring company in New Orleans, doesn't become a statewide law until January of next year, and it will apply to every entity, even the juvenile courts. So why do we have to wait till next January to get this right when we're already doing it right in the city with with one of the service providers? Why aren't we using that firm to do the work in juvenile offenders? So in looking at the case involving, the 15-year-old that was murdered, he was murdered at 8:45. According to the media reports, he was under an order by the court to abide by the New Orleans juvenile curfew rules, which means that not allowed to be out of his house after 9 p.m., meaning that he was murdered 15 minutes before he would have been in violation of that. So you can't having that condition, he wasn't in violation of any conditions of his release when he was actually murdered. But it raises the question, if this is an offender that was charged and had open charges, why is he allowed to stay out till 9 p.m.? Wearing a monitor is a privilege, not a right. And if this is a young man that had difficulty in complying with the law, why not put him on house arrest or impose a curfew, allowing him out of the house only to attend school, go to work, or attend some type of treatment or counseling services? So, but that's on the judge or judges that made that rule. But electronic monitoring works, and this law, I think, is an important first step. But I think that it doesn't quite go far enough. And by that, I'm talking about the law requires that the equipment be working, that there be real-time monitoring, and that judges or Department of Corrections or Office of Juvenile Justice officials have to impose some specific conditions for pretrial or post-conviction release. And it requires that if an offender violates their conditions of release, the monitoring company has to notify that agency within 24 hours. Quite frankly, that's too late in many instances. There needs to be real-time monitoring, and there needs to be real-time enforcement. And the law doesn't provide for that yet, even though in New Orleans, Matt and Jill Dennis's firm do that. So when they see an offender that's perpetrated an offense, they immediately notify the court, but they immediately begin to attempt to rectify the situation and take that person into custody for meaningful and significant violations of conditions of release, i.e. things like trying to cut the monitor off, entering an exclusion zone where someone may have been told to stay away from a victim or a witness. They enter that area, they notify the court, but they also immediately go out and attempt to take that person into custody or redirect them out of those exclusion zones. That's the capabilities of this technology, and unless and until it's harnessed properly, there are going to be tragedies like what we saw happen with this 15-year-old. And sometimes it won't be a 15-year-old victim, it'll be a 15-year-old that is perpetrator of a crime that has ultimately, cost someone their life. And we've seen that happen as recently as earlier this summer, where a 15-year-old wearing a monitor murdered the tour guide in the French Quarter. And that was in the middle of the night. And again, no real-time monitoring, no real consequences, and there has to be some real-time, meaningful responses to violations of conditions of release. The other thing that's lacking in the law, in my opinion, is that everybody that is on a monitor, in addition to any specific conditions that are imposed by the court or the state, also is ordered not to commit any other crimes. And this technology is based on global positioning. So everybody wearing a monitor, you can determine where they are at any given time. And what Matt and Jill Dennis is doing with their firm, they're allowing law enforcement to access everybody wearing a monitor. So anytime there is a major offense committed in the city of New Orleans, the police department geomaps every major offense. And ASAP and Matt and Jill Dennis's firm allow law enforcement unrestricted access to their database to determine if anyone wearing a monitor was at the scene of a crime when a crime was perpetrated. And that tool has been helpful to law enforcement in identifying suspects that the police were able to link to some of the crimes of violence that occurred and resulted in the arrest of offenders for serious crimes of violence and other felony offenses. So the new law does some wonderful things, creating some statewide parameters. Doesn't go quite far enough, and I think there's the opportunity to fix it going forward. But unless and until we do, and unless those rules are applied to juvenile offenders, we're going to continue to see tragedies play out like we just talked about.
Why this is not going to be implemented before January 1st is I think that there's a complete total lack of having an insatiable thirst to want to know. You know, these juvenile offenders, you want to know things about what they're doing. I just don't see that approach. I don't see that attitude. Got to get to a break. We're visiting with Raphael Goyeneche, president of the Metropolitan Crime Commission. We'll be right back, folks. Stay with us. Welcome back, folks. We're visiting with Raphael Goyeneche, president, Metropolitan Crime Commission. Another indictment that has come forward. Randy Farrell,